Hi, my name is Nolan Hack. I'm a black revolutionary from Los Angeles, California.
Illari, Chaska, interested in the liberation of Semanawak.
Tracy, Tiny, one of you want to introduce yourselves to the rest of the panel?
This is Tiny, daughter of Dee, poverty scholar and welfare queen, speaking for all of us folks that no one ever wants to see.
My name is Tracy. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. I'm a former educator in the area of criminal justice.
All right. I thought I'd start tonight out by reading the words of a gentleman who frequents the panel. It couldn't be on tonight. A gentleman by the name of John Kane, native activist out of New York and radio host. And tonight's topic is dealing with intergenerational trauma as Black and Indigenous people. And these are John's words. The issue is that much is made of intergenerational trauma, but I would argue that cognitive dissidence is a bigger contributor to depression and social dysfunction, including identity issues. Now, from my standpoint, I get where he's coming from, but I kind of look at it as a combination, because we know where the chicken, there's no chicken and the egg here. Like, we know what happened first. Colonization happened first. And then that cognitive dissonance got created where, speaking as a black man, black men and native men started to buy into that bogus patriarchy and colonized thinking and treating women as second-class citizens, and not even as humans, even leaving our partners or wives for lighter-skinned women or white women, if we could get away with it at the time. So there's obviously a lot to unpack here. But anybody want to kind of go?
I have a quick question for you.
Kick it.
Are we using the term intergenerational trauma and historical trauma as synonyms, or are we making a distinction between the two?
What do you mean? Because like you could argue it's one and the same. Obviously, both can be also two different things. But what do you mean? The historical meaning, but we're looking back at because
what I've noticed in some of the literature I read is that therapists make a distinction between the two. Historical trauma would fall more under slavery, descendants of the Holocaust, Native American genocide, and they use the term intergenerational trauma to refer to more personalized experiences, such as PTSD, war, sexual abuse and violence, and how the trauma affects the next generation, up to 3 generations downward.
Oh, well, I'm glad you asked that question and brought that up. I would say both, because speaking from my own experiences, I look at intergenerational trauma as something that I would say I do experience as a black person, as a black man. one, through my own experiences of continuation of genocide and colonization, and then also tying that into what my father went through, my great grandmother, or going back and back and back and back. So I would say both.
Okay.
Just bring it. I mean, bring what you want to share. Bring what you want to be heard, and any experiences that you're okay with discussing. Because I know this is living in the society that we live in. One thing that has it eats at me is there's no apology. We're not going to stop hitting you in the face, and then two, we're not going to say sorry for it, for before or right now, and then there's the white denial on top of that. So like I said, a lot to unpack there, but anybody want to jump in?
Well, I don't know if somebody could explain exactly or define it, right? Maybe we should start by defining the intergenerational, like historic trauma. But if it's also, because I don't know exactly what it is, and if it's something that actually is, affects something, like creates, I don't know, some biological changes in a human. Based on if a kid is hurt or abused, he has a higher chance of maybe having a child that's more prone to violence. I don't know if that's exactly what we're talking about.
Well, yeah, that's one example. You could speak on the patriarchy from a male perspective in both of our communities. The depression rates of all genders being increased because of things that we carry from way back when, or 10 years ago, or whenever. I remember a brother I was staying with about a year and a half ago. I was doing some work out of state, and he told me that he had slave flashbacks. And at the time, I could only imagine what he was talking about. Like, I read about slavery. I know my ancestors went through it. I know it's still going on, here in the prison system, Libya, for goodness sake. But then, last 4th of July, I literally experienced what he was talking about. My brain started having slave flashbacks. I had after that had lost in my family my cousin, who was run over by a white woman who tried to kill her, and eventually she succeeded because she stayed in a coma for over a decade and then passed on. But she was in the hospital at the time still, and hadn't woken up after all these years. I went to see her with my other cousin, her son. And before and after we went inside, hospice, not hospital, there were fireworks going on before and after. And I'm just thinking in my brain, like, they celebrate this.
Right.
They celebrate our murders. They celebrate the rapes of our women. They celebrate stealing our children. They celebrate ruining any harmony, any community that we ever create. And it's celebrated. And I started to, my brain went backwards, and I'm thinking, geez, being be whipped and chained, made to work for free. No, we're not human beings at all. We're just property for them to do what they will. So that's my, I guess, interpretation of intergenerational trauma and the definition. I think Tracy gave a better clinical version.
Well, one of the things that I noticed is that the terminology, they don't really even agree on the terminology that they're using, and they're still having discussions about the terminology. To answer the question that was asked before you just spoke, intergenerational trauma is where the person experiencing a direct trauma, they call that the first generation trauma survivor. That trauma is transferred to the next generation and so on and so on. Whatever that trauma may be, is a general consensus. I've noticed that in conversations on Twitter, the term that I'm seeing the most is intergenerational trauma. It was once called transgenerational trauma, and I don't see the distinction on Twitter that I see in the literature between intergenerational trauma and historical trauma. So I think they're still having discussions on what these differences are. Although historical trauma, I believe it to be a type of intergenerational or transgenerational trauma. We're talking about traumas that move from generation to generation, and that can be on a broad societal scale, or it can be an individual experience this particular trauma, and it affects their children, their grandchildren, and so on.
I guess I'm trying to understand it affects them in what way. Causes chances of having certain, maybe having an increased chance of being an alcoholic or something like that, or like I said before, prone to maybe like be more violent or angrier.
I can offer a little bit of information. It's a tiny. For me, it's always personal. My mom would say personal is political. She was an orphan, Afro-Boricua, hated, unprotected child in the system. Her physical body was raped and molested over 200 times by the time she was like 3. And I only know that because I recently got her what I call anti-social work record from the child separation services, but her mama was encouraged to give her up because of poverty and all of those criminalizing, traumatizing colonizer words like bastard and illegitimate and all that crazy shit that they put on us. And so she came out of that and just, kind of got older, because people, if they survive shit like that, and I'm not really feeling the resilient word, because as a poor person, I think we just get up and put our clothes on and keep on keeping on by any means necessary. And I think that there's sort of these terms get overblown, but made it alive, getting with my white dad, because he was taught that whiteness was rightness, and had me. And literally, I think by the time I was 4 years old, he was unable to parent me, and I became her mom, and she did her best, and I'm so honored that I could be her daughter. And then as an indigenous daughter, I stayed with Mom until the day she transitioned, and we worked together, and a lot of other stories I won't go into now, but all that to say, I carry her pain every fucking day. Even when you had topic, Nolan, it was like, I was like, oh my God, should I really even enter that call? Because right now I'm getting like really, I'm getting really intense, I think, because I haven't done healing around this yet. I know as a person who struggled most of my life, I don't really have time to do anything but work. And then as a revolutionary, like we're all caught up in that all the time because that keeps us alive, you know. And I know that I need to, but I don't really know if I can. But all that to say, in terms of the question, I think that Tracy you were getting at was, you know, what does it lead to? It leads to, yeah, the person, my mom was angry all the time. She was depressed all the time. She was in pain all the time. How did that manifest? Violence toward me. It was pretty intense. She became, you know, by white science or Western therapeutic industrial complex, she was agoraphobic, is what they called that. But I also believe it's really just being without a village, being unhinged from your people, which is what colonization leads to, you know, isolation, the cult of independence. And that chick kills. And we had nobody. And so that's how we ended up unhoused and on the street for most, like, 10 years of my childhood. Sleeping in doorways, bus benches, shelter beds, our car, you know, wherever the fuck we can be. You know, but holding on. And my mom was also an artist. And so there were beautiful moments, too, and we worked together and we came up and through that, not out of it, through it together because of consciousness. Of her learning back the things that were stolen from her by this white supremacist society. And that's because, you know, people survive, right? And that's how we ended up starting Poor Magazine. It's a big, long story. But how does that translate? I don't know if that gets to answering. It can be in many ways, but in terms of the intergenerational piece, the person, the child, the whoever, right, the descendant, is definitely impacted. How they end up manifesting and going on is another story. You know, that's your story, right? But the relationship, the entwinement, the connection, and what it's laden with, I think therein lies the intergenerational trauma.
Yeah, there's a lot. I think the funny thing about it, or the tragic thing about it, is most of us don't even know it's a thing. And when you're walking around in whatever society you're in, and you don't realize you have an affliction. I'd even go so far to call it a disease because it's cancerous, whether you know you have to deal with it or not. Because as you said, that pain, it's like a line that just gets carried over, whether it be anger or sadness or fear. And I think fear is something very, very real that is passed down. I remember as a child, even though I was told that the police are there to protect you, they're good people. Every single time I saw a boy in blue or a person in blue, I'd flinch. Every time I heard a siren, not knowing if it was a police car or a fire truck, whatever, my head would go to whatever side it thinks the sound was at. And that still happens to me to this day. And that could be explained with intergenerational trauma, because I'm 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, living in pretty Redondo Beach in California. I was taught that, like you said, Tiny, white is right. there's no racism is not really a thing.
Yep.
Things in place, powers that be, there to help you, not hurt you. So I had no reason other than that cloud over my head of intergenerational trauma to fear police. And then, of course, now I'm 30 years old. I've dealt with police in different ways. None really positive, obviously, if you know me. And I know what I know now, and know what the slave patrols / and I use this in quotes, Indian patrols, what they really are about. They were invented to harm us or take us off the face of the earth. But a child, there's no reason for a child to know that, especially in the environment I was in, but hence the intergenerational trauma.
Yeah.
I can give another example. Colorism in the African American community.
Yeah.
When I was younger, the term colorism did not exist. This was coined in the 80s. I was born in 1970. And I did not have the words to describe what I was experiencing at the time. I just knew for some reason people saw me as different and treated me differently because I'm multiracial and I'm light skinned, but I'm identified as a black woman. And yeah, but we can talk for an hour on those experiences, but suffice it to say that being viewed as other, as different, what are you, made me feel really terrible as a child. And I couldn't understand why. I didn't know it was because my skin is light and I just knew I looked different and I was treated differently and people thought I was different. In my teenage years, it manifested in really terrible bullying. As a young adult, it manifested in my mother really not liking my natural curls. She preferred my hair to be flat iron, and if I went to work with my naturally curly hair, she thought I wasn't being professional. And I'm happy to say that my mother is now 66 and rocks sister locks. But she absolutely hated natural hair. And it wasn't until I landed on social media and read this work and saw the conversation that I had a name to even fit to what I experienced. In all of my studies in college, and I went to an HBCU, colorism was a word I'd never heard before. But we experienced that going back to slavery in terms of the rape of black women, black slaves, and producing a generation after generation of light-skinned children who benefited from that and also suffered from it. So that's another example of intergenerational trauma. That's just been carried out for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
That's erasure of our humanity, basically. I almost said indigeneity, but at least in terms of the land that I'm standing on, that only applies to indigenous people. And I was born on Tonga land and in Southern California, not in my people's homeland of Africa, so that's why I use the word humanity. But that's the thing that make you, whether it's through forced impregnation like the Sally Hemings, or through that indoctrination of white is right, and everything else is wrong. And and Tracy, you're talking about it yourself. I could talk about that for days. That's one reason why I look at something like Seinfeld, and I'm like, I feel like I'm the only one in the room who's going, no one else sees the problem with this? There's only white people in New York City in the 90s. One is it's not realistic, and two, this is racist as hell. And of course, they had one episode where they had a Native woman on, and Jerry did I'm not even going to do it, but the hand on the mouth, yelling noises that you see so often in American film and TV. But that's so prevalent with that trauma that we carry because, and through I think you look at John's quote, that cognitive dissonance that a lot of us have, thinking that using products to lighten our skin, straighten our hair, talk white. And then, of course, you have something like the residential schools for indigenous people, where if you don't talk in good phonetic English, bad things are going to happen to you. So they're talking about intergenerational trauma. You carry that down, and white is okay. Be them. Don't be you. Don't be what you look like. Be them. They're right, you're wrong. And it's scary how that's still the case in society. I was reading slave writings to prepare for this, just to get even more of a feel for this topic. And you could see the lack of English in one black person's writing. But then you think, this is not their fault at all. We were banned from learning to read or write. And then we're expected, the second slavery was quote unquote over, okay, now you be a productive member of society with absolutely no skills at all. How are we supposed to do that? And then, of course, today we have all these schools still doing horrible things to our children, keeping education from them, disciplining them for being the race that they are. The NYPD, the only kids they arrested in 2017 were colored, or 99% of them. So I guess 99.9 or whatever it was. So 1% or 0.1% were a few white children. But yeah, something we carry and is so prevalent. It's terrifying. But we have three women on the panel tonight, and I definitely want to get as much of a perspective from an indigenous and a black woman as y'all are willing to share, because this thing of intergenerational trauma, this thing called colonization, nobody has been more affected by it negatively than black and Native women. I know from we look at I'll just speak for black men. I don't want to step over anybody's toes, but even though it's hard enough for us to navigate through all of this, and in the communities that we live in, most of the time the depression or the symptoms of depression, depressive symptoms that black men have because of this disease called intergenerational trauma, we're not allowed to really talk about. We have to just man up and just, no, we're cool, everything's okay, and then we take that out on our women, along with the fact that before all this happened, a major chunk of both Turtle Island, South America, and Africa, the women were respected. They were so often in charge. They were matrilineal societies. Matriarchy was the opposite of abnormal. And today it's the exact opposite.
Yeah. I'm just really glad that you're speaking on that, Nolan, and I don't know, I'd encourage you to do more work on that in general. It's just because it's a tricky person that I was with the last 10 years, and the ways in which they were crushed inside and unable to speak or even understand some of the things that you're saying. That's just a lot of medicine. I just want to say. And I don't feel like I can speak on that at all. I feel like I definitely understand the experience of broken, colonized, and traumatized mamas and grandmothers, abuelitas, and bisabuelas, etc., and daughters, and that's a different kind of destruction, right? But anyway, I just really wanted to just encourage you to do more work on that, because there's not enough. And as far as watching Seinfeld, I just can't watch middle class white people anymore. Like that's just, which means most media cannot be consumed by me at this point. But I can't. It's traumatizing. I can't do it. I just decided. Anyway.
I'm the same way. I'll get into a show or a movie, and I'm like, all right, it's enjoyable, it's entertaining. Where are we? Are we in the back? The help? Or of course,
right.
You have a stupid, or I should say, racist comment. And so oftentimes it's an anti-native comment, because anti-native comments are considered to be normal, and there's nothing wrong with them, because
right.
indigenous people are just background. They're myths. They're treated as myths, and I think that what you said, Tanya, about trying to intake entertainment, TV, movies, etc., it kind of represents the whole ball of wax. How in the hell are we supposed to survive just day to day doing anything in this society? Because the whole ball of wax, as I called it, is denied. There's such a taboo put on people who deny the Jewish Holocaust, as there should be. But then the high majority of this society and white America does the exact same thing that Holocaust deniers do with black and indigenous people. Slavery's not that bad. States' rights, that's why the Civil War was fought. That Native people all died from the sniffles and lost their land in a card game.
People say that, lost it in a card game? What the hell?
Yeah, I've seen it.
I haven't ran into that one yet.
Oh yeah, I've seen that one before. Just just completely made up, ridiculous.
That is made up, yeah.
I struggle to find how to react to that type of dehumanization. For me, the
what now that you mentioned it, got me thinking. But wouldn't if people usually that are of African or indigenous descent have these traumas due to mistreatment by European societies, doesn't that mean that Europeans would more inherit maybe more of the characteristics of their ancestors, like maybe less lack of empathy on people? Because I mean, you have to have that to be able to kill a lot of people. So like I'm assuming that the reason why they never really changed is because, I mean, if damage can be inherited, that also can be inherited too.
Yeah, and there's been studies, or I should say, there's one study in particular that proves that, along with your normal everyday studies of, yes, sadly, white people are racist. I don't know what to tell you. But one study in particular in Toronto back in, I think it was 2010, I'm actually pulling it up now, showed that white folks lack empathy towards us as people of color. And I think that could be traced to exactly what you're talking about. And then it could be traced to that indoctrination that still happens to this day, like a Seinfeld, where you have an episode where you completely strip a Native woman of her humanity. So then you, as a white person, you're thinking, well, that's okay. That's Howell Street, and quote unquote, I'm not going to use the word, the I word. I'm not going to use it, but that's how I'm going to treat Native women. And I'm thinking, as I'm saying that, we're forced to use their terminology and their language and their mannerisms and everything, basically like the little toys. Because if you say indigenous to your average white person, they look at you sideways. And as a black person, when I say something like, I consider the phrase African American to be a slur, they look at me sideways. And I always explain, well, okay, Africa is not a country. Not a country, and then we're not considered Americans, to paraphrase Malcolm X. So the phrase does not pertain to us. But everything's supposed to be on their line of thinking. If you differ from that, then you're going to have problems.
Well, their line of thinking doesn't consider anyone. I mean, just think about the fact that, just like how you're bringing up, obviously, if you become a little more conscious about what's going on, you would definitely think, like, yeah, African American is an insulting term. And then, but yet, at the same time, I don't know if people have noticed, but they call themselves natives now. Native to Canada, native to America. Like, they do that, which I find very interesting. Because, like, what they did wasn't that long ago. It's like, you're looking at 500, plus years. Like, that was yesterday. But now they're native.
Yeah.
So what gets someone to get to that point? It has to be all psychological.
I wonder about the roots of that myself, because I try very hard, one, because I'm half white, and two, because I want to hope that there isn't a race of people that is just inherently demonic. That's one, that's scary, and two, that's just depressing as hell.
Would you say that a specific race is what?
Demonic. Just like inherently.
Oh, well, I don't.
Like
Well, I've thought about this, but I wouldn't, because, like, like, if you use the word demonic, it'd be all, like, biblical and well, like religious almost. But the thing is, I see it more of on an evolutionary standpoint of what it took for what we call arbitrarily race, right? Because even that they made up. Technically, like, there is no such thing as the European race or white race. And if you were to do analysis on all the types of, I wouldn't even say types, all the ethnicities of humans, there's only a few. And then indigenous people would be their own. Australian people would be their own. What we call Africans would be their own. And then there's Asians, right? And then there's Caucasians, which include Middle Eastern people and what we call white, right? So even that's made up. Like, that's so, like, they've been making up a lot of stuff. But back to the evolutionary thing, you're saying that if a specific type of human is, like, damned, right, or something like that. I've thought about this more in line of we first started by saying, like, what group is mostly serial killers? And it's Europeans, right? What group is mostly pedophiles? European men. Even now, you could go and look at the statistics of who's doing, which I find this term very ugly and insulting and demeaning. It's so unhuman to call it sex tourism. It's sex exploitation, right? And it's usually European men. And then also, I noticed that when, like, I'm just going to say women, but it's not all women, right? It's when women fall, quote unquote, in love with let's say a killer or a serial killer, it's usually European women. And I thought, well, that's kind of weird. And then I thought, well, does it have to do with the fact that in Europe and basically in some parts of the old world, it was just brutal. Like, they had no food, they're fighting. You know what I'm saying? Like, in comparison to the indigenous world, it wasn't like that. It wasn't an extreme, or, you know, so that environment they lived in caused them to, let's say, cause some sort of genetic mutation or something to do with psychology to want to be with somebody violent, because that violent man equals protection or food or something like that. And actually kind of quickly read on, maybe I thought, like, is this too crazy or something? And no, it's some guy with a PhD pretty much said that he theorized that. It has something to do with that. So what I'm saying is that maybe not look at it as a demonic thing, but more like, well, every type of person, or what we, like I said, we'll call European or white, whatever, black or indigenous, for thousands upon thousands of years lived in a certain environment, which means you have certain evolutionary traits. So I think that correlates with what we're seeing now today.
Yeah.
Now, I have read some articles in places like Psychology Today that researchers are studying whether genes actually alter themselves as a result of trauma. Yeah, they're still studying that. And I understand what you are saying, because it has been proposed before in terms of evolutionary writers that I've come across through the years who propose that in different areas in the globe, people survive by different means. And could the mere hardship of trying to survive where you live encoded itself some way, if you will, in a group of people? I don't know that we'll ever have the answer to these questions. I do believe that we can work on reducing trauma in our own lives and the generations that follow us. And I really I think that social media has played a huge role in making people more aware because we're so connected now to people we otherwise never would have been connected to. I know that my thinking, my education has greatly improved from interacting with people like Nolan and people like you, whom I just met tonight. Makes me think about all kinds of things that I wish I had known when I was 15, 16, 17, and how it could have altered the course of my life for the better had I known.
It's interesting you say that, Tracy, because there are times where I feel I miss being, as they call it, in the Matrix. I miss being a lot more ignorant because the shit is so damn depressing. When I read a lot of the stories of my own people, I'll tear up, I'll get angry, all the negative emotions you could imagine. But I have this very similar emotions when I read or hear stories from indigenous people. I consider Native people to be my family and our family, just because what has happened historically, and just we've kind of been thrown together, and we're so similar, and we're so. A lot of the things that make us unique, or made us unique back in the day, and made us, and I mean unique in a positive way, the way our societies act and how it acted and how advanced we were, how pro-woman we were, pro-gay, transgender, bisexual, you name it, especially indigenous people in that respect. I just kind of look at it as like, well, we have no reason to be apart. I mean, when I see someone like Jason Perro or Tina Fontaine, I die inside, just like I die inside when I see Stephon Clark or Dorian Harris. You're talking about the term native now being used by white people. The possible governor, you're possibly the next governor of New York. One of the first things she said, and she's of Sex and the City fame, speaking of this great white entertainment that they give us, Cynthia Nixon, she said, we're going to take our country back. And those are the first four words I heard. Those are the first words I heard from her after I heard that she announced. I was, all right, forget you. Where's the mute button? Where's the off button? I have no interest in your campaign. It's not your country. It's not your land. And white people are absolutely allergic to admitting that. And it drives me crazy, and I'm not Native, and I can only imagine how much.
No, and I know, and that's why I brought that up, because you can kind of sit there and break it down to them and say, like, okay, the first excuse is always to say, well, I didn't know slaves. I didn't genocide nobody. You know, it's usually some really simplistic, like, analysis. That's the first thing they go to. And then you can, like, well, nobody's saying you did it. How could you? You weren't born yet. But throughout generations and generations, each generation was okay with accepting stolen land and making laws subjugating African and indigenous people. So at some point, how are you any different from the original invaders of 1492 if you're supporting the system, no matter what? And they can't process that. Which is like, why is it? I mean, that's what to me, that's why I always use the thing where it's like, instead of using maybe words like good and evil, because everybody, we know that people use that arbitrarily. Not everybody, they always flex these words to fit into, right? Like Catholic Church or Christianity or whatever. So it's like you say they're the most immoral people at the moment.
On average, no one can refute that. That's this terrifying thing. And one thing that people don't discuss, what you just brought up, when they deny our genocide, double genocide, past or present, is that act right there of denial is traumatizing us right there in the, and we're just supposed to be okay with that. And sadly, a lot of what I was taught, or a big chunk of it, was just let it roll off your back. You know, they don't know any better. Just give them a hug. And that's why I always, and granted, Martin Luther King figured that out eventually. That's one reason why I always gravitated more to Malcolm than Martin, even though I love them both and I thank God for them every day. I'm not about to give you some kind of crash course, and every white person I come into contact with, on how to treat me as a human being and how you should treat us as human beings, and acknowledging something that is hidden. But if I figured it out and I'm sifting through all this trauma myself, you can certainly do the same thing in an inverse effect, going, okay, geez, we did all this stuff in my folks to them, and we probably need to stop. We're still doing it. And the study go ahead.
Oh, no, you're just bringing a good point of, like, that you're using an example. If people of African descent have a harder time because of environmental, problems, right? Like, we don't live in the best neighborhoods, and we don't have a lot of money. We have bad schools, right? And you still find a way to manage to treat people right. Why the hell do they have such a problem? I have a hard time figuring that out. They have the very opposite. Yeah, they don't want to.
Tracy, ironically, came on a podcast radio show that I just on hiatus, but I host, and it's about pop culture. But one thing I wanted to bring up was Nat Turner, because of the movie that came out, and just how we're treated every day, and dehumanized by entertainment as well. How we're the ones going through this. They're putting us through it. They put us through it. They haven't stopped. They haven't apologized. They keep continuing. They will not stop. We ask them to stop. We're begging, pleading, some of us. But we're the civil ones. We're not going into movie theaters. We're not going to bomb their houses or FedEx, or kill them at FedEx. But they are, either to their own folks or more killings of us. And like you said, you're like, why? Like, how you think it'd be the other way around? There'd just be Nat Turners of Black and Native people all over the place, because how the heck, humans are not supposed to handle this intergenerational trauma. Humans are not supposed to handle what they do to us every single day. And the study that I brought up about the lack of empathy, and you brought up a very question at the point. It was performed at the University of Toronto, Scarborough, and they found that white folks was significantly less, their motor cortex. Man, I'm not Ben Carson. In many ways, I'm not Ben Carson. So I'm not try my best to relay this information. They found that white participants' motor cortex was significantly less likely to fire when they watched visible minority men perform a simple task. Yet it was different when they watched another white man or another white person. And the study kind of goes into talking about how little activity their brain and that motor cortex would present when they saw a colored person, a person of color in pain versus a white person in pain. And there's that lack of empathy. And you see it, I mean, you see it all the time. I mean, if you're going to say, if Stormy Daniels ran for queen of the universe, she'd have a good shot. Yet, we're trying to just mourn our loved ones that they kill, and we get, from the majority, no real support at all. In fact, it's the other way around. He deserves to be killed. Stephon deserved to be killed. Iona Jones is, you know, her father and family, they're just criminals. So it's just good riddance. Like, what the hell are you? What's wrong with you? Which is the, you know, that's the question. What the hell is wrong with it? At least in the discussion that we're having right now, we can figure out what's wrong with us in terms of these negative thoughts and how they affect us, because those negative thoughts come from what is wrong with them, whatever it is, and what they're doing to us and what they've done to us. And it's just so hard to grasp. They haven't stopped. And that trauma, the intergenerational trauma, the historical trauma, either or either, you see whatever example you want to come up with, 1735, 1946, 2017, 2018, it's carbon copies, just in evolved genocidal form. It's absolutely astounding and disturbing, and that's what I was saying before. I hope that this is a learned defect in white folks, instead of it being, no, that's just how they are, most of them, because a lot of us have to protect ourselves from being labeled a black supremacist or, you know, those types of reverse racists, all those wild traits. But it's not, you know, not all white folks, but the majority of white folks. I hope that's not the case. I hope it's a learned defect of racism. It gets passed down, that we know. I just hope that's where it started. Like, they just got spooked by the darker skin, you know, innocently, and some negative things just came about accidentally or something. I'm just hoping for the best here. That's what I'm relaying, because the other reality terrifies me.
Yeah, it is something scary to think about. I mean, just looking at numbers, you know, like I mentioned before. I mean, even today, you could just, like, what countries produce the most serial killers? The United States, Canada, and the UK. And it's like, wow. Like, most of the top 5 are going to be European countries.
Yeah. And then you kind of add on to how you were talking, how European society was before colonization, before they started this whole mess. Feudalism was on its last legs. It was destroying the continent. Without our blood, sweat, and tears, they're screwed. They may have died out by the plague and all that mess.
No, they would have. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very hard to refute that. And what is not acknowledged is, hey, you're going to even acknowledge what we did to help you against our will? You know, I hear all the time, and we all do, because it's the only genocide Western society ever recognizes. I've said that 100 million times. But here's the 100 million first time. black people were in the Holocaust. Treated even worse than the Jewish people in the camps that we were in. We were segregated from the Jewish people and other white people in the camps. We had to clean up the gas chambers right after they were used. We had to help those evil SOBs, Joseph Mengele and all the rest of them, perform those absolutely inhumane experiments. And then they killed us afterwards. So we could never say anything about it, and then to just kill us because we don't deserve to live. But where are the Holocaust movies about us? Where is the reparations? Where is the Holocaust Day of National Day of Mourning, whatever it's called? That's the indigenous day that should be more recognized. But the Holocaust Memorial Day, whatever it's called, we're not even involved in that. And we're just kind of, those of us who know about it, because most people don't. I accidentally came on to, stumbled onto the information of there being a significant portion of the population, black people, in the Holocaust, about 20 to 25,000 people, not knowing how many survived. Very few did. But that correlates with everything else. I mean, you have people on this land right now, and Brazil is a good example. There are more black people in Brazil than there are in every African country but 2. That's not our land. Brazil is indigenous land. And when you think of Brazil, you don't think of native people at all. The Brazilian soccer team, samba, the very colorful music, Rio de Janeiro, the big statue of white Jesus. You don't think of native people. But that's the whole thing. Just complete denial and erasure, and then continual genocide. Stealing more land, killing more killings of the both of us. You said before, you're talking about 500 plus years of land theft and all that. I mean, Trump, people with that lack of acknowledgement, Trump is stealing native land right now. Obama did the same thing. All the other, in this country, it's never stopped. You're still systematically killing both parties, black and indigenous people. But
yeah, because it makes you think, right? Like, if you could just go back and, like, maybe 100 years in, or even 200 years in of invading, like, I'm always like, none of them had crossed their mind, like, maybe we shouldn't be here. Like, maybe we shouldn't take their stuff. Maybe we shouldn't kill them. But then again, like, I know that sometimes a lot of the historical trauma is focused on people of color. But I think even for Europeans, it should be something it's focused on too. Maybe it's just labeled under a different label or something. But my point is that how can somebody, Columbus, lands on our land, and the first thing he thinks is, I'm going to enslave them and take their stuff, even though most, if not all, indigenous people were willing to trade. Because I remember reading that when Russians came here, the indigenous people of near Alaska met up with them and were like, hey, we're ready to trade, when they came in their boats. It's like, they didn't do that. I mean, there's one incident, I think, where they took an indigenous couple and they put them in the boat, I guess in that area, jailed, I don't know, and then wanted to see them have intercourse. Like, I don't know how that, I can't even process, how that crosses somebody's mind.
That's a terrifying
They
thing.
stripped them naked, and then it wasn't like they didn't like people from near the Arctic. They're not. They that wasn't something they really liked, right? It wasn't custom to do that. So for them, it was really, at least when I read it, it described it as something very embarrassing, and they were like trying to cover their bodies, and especially because the other person's not their wife.
That just scares me. Yeah, I've kind of gotten to the point where one is a revolutionary and two is a black person, or I don't care. I mean, I'm already viewed as less than anyway, so if you're going to call me all these reverse racist names, whatever. My mother was white. My grandparents, not an exception. I've heard stories of some of my family members on that side of the family that aren't they don't paint them in a very positive light when it comes to people of color. My grandfather, and this is all the strings of the inner web of colonization right here. My grandfather was a very, very successful high school football coach in Anaheim, California. The nickname to this day of the school are the Colonists. To this day, Anaheim Colonists.
What the?
Won all these CIF championships, high school football championships, state championships. I'm looking through the yearbooks because my mother was a cheerleader. She was a colonist. Shit is crazy. So I'm looking through the yearbook, looking at football teams, white players. I get it's the 60s. What the hell? Come on, it's Anaheim. You gotta have somebody. Nobody. Anybody? People of color on the team? Nope. Nothing. And I've heard stories. One, if you're not going to have any, if you're only having white players on your team, obviously something's wrong with you. But then I heard stories even back that up further that like okay. And my mother was an amazing person. She put her children first. She gave birth to my youngest sibling. She gave birth to my youngest sibling 4 days before she died of cancer and refused any pain treatment at all. I don't know how she survived an extra 4 days, but there's so much goodness in her. But then there's that learned defect of racism. First time my father, black father, former Black Panther, former Black Muslim, the whole nine back in the 60s, takes her to Compton to meet his family, which becomes my family, of course. They park the car. Her side of the car, passenger's side, is next to the sidewalk. She's about to open the door. It's unlocked. Brother on a bike comes right by, riding the bike on the sidewalk. She locks the door. So the first instinct, she's a black man on a bike, minding his own business, just like she is. Lock the car, he's dangerous. And to this day, that scares the hell out of me. And there was a book on her nightstand. It's called "It Takes a Village," which is a stolen African proverb. Stolen African proverb that Mrs. Hillary Rodham Clinton used to write a book. And in that book, she describes how she put black men who were prisoners of the state of Arkansas into slavery just at the governor's mansion, working for free for her and her husband at garden parties. And Hillary was a hero of my mom's. And I look back and go, you have a black son. You heard her call young black males super predators. In the book, she calls young black or black men emotionally illiterate. So looking back, my mother died when I was 8. Looking back, I'm like, Mom, I love you. I'd throw myself in front of a train for you, but what? How? And there's that question again. Why? And how? Why and how? Why are they acting like this? And how did they get to this point originally? Because we know, I mean, just take my mom from my grandfather. She learns those things from my grandfather in particular. So recently, in recent times in the white society, Western society, okay, hey, yeah, this is a learned skill. You're continually passing this on. This is why we still have Roosevelts and then Kennedys and then Clintons and Bushes, etc. But then what the hell happened originally? Why, And I'm so glad you brought that question up, Illari, because that it needs to be asked. We always look like the basis for tonight's panel was the intergenerational trauma that we deal with. But the question needs to be asked the other way. What the hell is wrong with y'all? But this was probably one of our tougher panels to talk about and communicate. But I'm glad we did it, and I think Tiny had to jump off the call, and I thank her for joining us, and I thank you too as well. This is, I think, a needed conversation, and I'm thankful to have shared it with you both, and I hope to see you guys back on sometime in the near future on the Red and Black Roundtable.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nolan. It was nice to meet everybody.
Same here.
Peace, everybody.
Goodbye.